Hey all, welcome to Parker's Reef. On today's episode, we're going to check out the mind-blowing coral spawning program at Monsoon Aquatics. Alright, thank you for joining me on another episode of Parker's Reef. Today we are going to continue on with my tour of the Monsoon Aquatics facility. Last week we went with Juno around the entire facility having a look at all of the coral frags they have there and the program they do to keep these corals in captivity, fragging them up and getting them out to home reef aquariums. Now today we're going to chat to Jonathan, the lead scientist, who's going to talk to us about the next evolution of that. We're moving from coral fragging onto coral spawning, which is just such a cool evolution, and the man has so much information and talent that it's difficult to capture in one YouTube video, but I've done my best and I promise it won't be too long. It is one that the information just flows and flows, so I'm really excited to share it with you. Now, Monsoon Aquatics have been awarded a Stage 2 Accelerating Commercialisation grant worth $528,000 to continue their work on coral spawning. This project is supported by the Australian Government Department of Industry, Science and Resources through Entrepreneurs Program. It follows on from a Stage 1 Acceleration Commercial Grant, which was awarded back in 2021 after the world's first successful spawning and grow out of the scolly corals. So far, they have spawned 6 species, including acans, acros, torches, trackies, hammers, and of course the scollies. Their vision is to be able to supply the ornamental aquarium market with fully aquacultured corals and to use the proceeds and technology developed for future reef restoration efforts. As a part of celebrating this grant and the success the team have had so far, they are planning to release the world's first commercially available captive spawned and raised scolly to the Australian market, which is super exciting. This is your opportunity to own a piece of home reef aquarium history in the making, which is just something that's not going to come up very often. All right, that's probably enough of a preamble from me. I think it's time we put a microphone on Jonathan and go have a look at this program that is kicking goals in the world of spawning corals in captivity. All right, I am here at Monsoon Aquatics with Jonathan, who is their lead scientist. We'll go with lead scientist, and he's here to talk about some incredibly exciting developments that have been happening here in the world of, well, I guess the next evolution of aquaculture for the facility. And Jonathan's going to tell us all about the history, the current, and I guess the future of where things are at Monsoon and what's going to happen in the future. So firstly, thank you for taking time. I know
no worries.
You're an incredibly busy man. You are a jack of all trades here at the facility, and that's why I hesitated when I said lead scientist, because I've seen you on the tools, I've seen you helping with fragging, I've seen you at every single corner of the facility. So I do appreciate your time, and I'm really excited to share your story with what's happening here with all the viewers.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, well, I can give a little bit of my history. I started here with Monsoon Aquatics about 2 years ago, 2 years yesterday actually.
Happy birthday.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, I was employed essentially to start accelerating their coral spawning program. So essentially what we're doing here in Bundaberg, we have 3 facilities at Monsoon Aquatics, and Bundaberg is really geared towards aquaculture. So that's, you might have heard of fragging, so that's asexual propagation of coral, cutting the coral up into smaller pieces.
Yes.
And allowing that to grow out so we can get good growth of that coral and then sell it to the aquarium trade. The next big step really is spawning. So from a parent colony, when you're fragging the coral, you might get 20, 30, 50 frags out of it. But out of that parent colony, if you're spawning them, you could get into the thousands. So
yeah, wow.
That's where it's really important to be able to develop that next step. And essentially one of the key species that we're concentrating on is the scolly. So this is a really high value coral in the aquarium trade. It's a little bit harder to collect. Some of those colours that are high value are also a lot rarer, and they fetch a high price. So essentially it's a really perfect model for us to start concentrating on for our spawning projects, to get that kind of numbers that we require beyond our catch quotas.
Yes.
To be able to supplement what we're doing with the wild fishery at the moment. So being our, I guess our target species, what we've found early on is, particularly with large polyp stony corals, is their spawning seasons can be different, and there can be multiple spawning events for some species. So the scollies is no exception in this case. We actually found that they spawn earlier, almost a month earlier than your big Great Barrier Reef spawning event.
Yes.
So that was a real key thing that we found, particularly early on, trying to target this species for a spawning program. So this all started, well, roughly about 2 years ago when I started here. We managed to secure a accelerating commercialisation grant. So this is an entrepreneurial grant that helps to accelerate our business side, but it has wide-ranging positive effects for us.
Yes.
And has opened a lot of doors up for us. And this was our target species. So essentially, we have the great advantage as a collector to be able to get corals from the wild, so we can skip a step in a way to start learning how this species spawns in captivity. So essentially what we've done in the last 2 years is collect wild broodstock. The best place at the moment for corals to be is out in the wild for gametogenesis, or producing eggs and sperm. Mm-hmm. So what we started doing is started to collect some of these corals and look at their behaviours, keep them for longer periods, and essentially had someone out at night every night for almost 2 months.
Wow.
Having someone on standby watching their behaviours around the spawning period.
Yep.
And with that hard work came the benefits of actually experiencing or witnessing them spawn in a captive situation of wild broodstock. So from that, there was a big learning curve, as with any aquaculture of any species, fish, coral, anything, is really learning how their life cycle works, how their larval rearing works. There's lots of stages where they can be quite sensitive. So we're really quite lucky in that first stage of getting these corals in. We got a big spawn, but there was lots of steps along the way to work out how do we get good fertilisation with these corals. So what they do, and I'm sure we can probably provide a video for you.
Absolutely.
Is they'll release a single polyp of these scollies will release an egg and sperm packet, and it comes and looks like a little marble.
Yep.
That'll float up to the surface of the water and then dissipate out. All the eggs and sperm will dissipate out. So that was our first step. Oh wow, we've got these egg packets, what do we do? Mm-hmm. Collecting them, mixing them, different egg packets and sperm packets from different animals, and trying to get that fertilisation.
Yes.
And then we actually needed infrastructure for raising the larvae. So they actually have a pelagic larval stage, or a stage where the fertilised egg floats out in the ocean, and then eventually after a few days it actually comes back to the reef. So we need to be able to create those conditions where those eggs are healthy, they're kept from bacterial infections, because out in the ocean they don't touch any tank walls or anything like that.
No surfaces. Yeah.
So we needed to be able to tumble these eggs to make sure they didn't touch the walls too much.
Yes.
Make sure they've got plenty of clean water. And what they can actually do is they stick to each other and form what's called a chimera. So out in the wild, this would be essentially a death sentence because it changes their swimming behaviour.
Right.
They can't settle properly. It may be an advantage in the aquarium trade, where you get different genetic material coming together, different eggs, creating a chimera.
Yes.
But that's one of those key things we had to work out. Do we want all these eggs to stick together?
For sure.
Or do we want them to be individuals and keep them tumbling in culture?
Yep.
Our next big sort of bottleneck or challenge for us was, how do they settle? So there's a lot of research out there for acros, small polyp stony corals.
Yes.
They queue to different things. So crustose coralline algae is one of those key things that they queue to, but the scollies do the same. The different species do the same thing. So we had to work that out. And also different species of coral may have different preferences for your surface topography of your settlement plates. So there's so many different things that had to come together, many points of failure, and we've learnt so much in the last 2 years that it's really enabled us to to communicate that for our first round of AC grant and win a second AC grant round, which has allowed us to expand and look into this further and really drill down into the detail of the science of the life cycle of scollies.
Yes.
And actually start exploring captive spawning, so getting them to a condition where the broodstock, these corals here, are producing eggs and sperm in captivity, and spawning those in captivity. So the whole life cycle of this animal is closed in a land-based aquaculture scenario.
Amazing.
Yeah, so I guess what we're doing at the moment is we're expanding into new space and allowing ourselves to be able to do this closed cycle, life cycle aquaculture.
Yep.
But there's still a lot to learn from it, and that's sort of where I come in, is building specific systems to allow that to happen, and also all the different steps and bottlenecks that we've identified along the way to look for solutions. I think someone said the best way to put it is we're at day one of a 100-year project. So we are really excited to be part of that. There's research institutions all across Queensland, even in Melbourne, that are looking at coral science, and it's really exciting to be part of that, and part of it in a way that benefits both the trade but also reef restoration projects as well.
It's a win-win, absolutely. And don't get me wrong, I appreciate that it's a massive, massive journey in the quote of the 100 years. But if this has been day one, it's been a heck of a day one, to be fair. I mean, you guys have achieved a lot, and really to be at the point now where you've proven the process. Sure, it's not exactly a well-oiled machine just yet, but you're at the point already where you are refining that process and finding alternatives for those bottlenecks, as you say, to just make the process become almost second nature.
Yeah, one of the key things I think that we're really concentrating on in the next year or so is just that the closing of the life cycle in captivity, and looking at ways to stimulate these corals to spawn out of season. So what actually encourages them to produce gametes, and what's the last steps that actually stimulates them to release those sperm and eggs.
Yes.
If we can unlock those secrets and then start to get out of season spawning, that's a real game changer for both us, the industry, and also for reef restoration, where we can have a small amount of broodstock that produce thousands and thousands of viable larvae.
Yes.
But we're producing those, 4, 5, 6 spawning events per year.
Yes.
Not just the one per year.
Just the one, yeah.
And that's a real key for us. So as a part of that, I've got a small research team that are looking into how we condition these broodstock.
Yes.
What they feed on, how often they feed, when is the best time to feed, what nutrition they need for producing gametes. So coming from an aquaculture background and fish, there's similar concepts where nutrition is different for the grow out of corals, for your fragging, and for recovery of corals so they can grow to a point that they're sellable.
Yes.
Is very different to encouraging broodstock to be able to produce eggs and gametes and spawn those and have really viable and good quality seed stock to be able to have those multiple spawns per year and have constant production. Yep.
And that's an interesting point. You talk about your fish aquaculture background, and whilst there obviously are some similarities and some polar opposites almost, the path that's been laid down, I guess, in the fish aquaculture space is where we're really trying to get with these sort of scollies, where we can manipulate and encourage, maybe the better choice of words, the natural process to happen almost on cue, at a frequency that's going to suit the facility and still the coral as well. Yeah,
for sure. And I mean, part of those things is making sure that we can do it in a cost-effective way, both for the aquarium trade, but also for reef restoration. If you're looking at big projects in reef restoration, you want to be able to do it in a cost-effective way and quickly and reliably.
Yes.
So that's one of the keys, and that's where essentially food fish aquaculture has carved a path. So we can really look at the lessons learned from that, glean some of that information to try and transfer that to a coral aquaculture scenario.
For sure.
Yep.
And I mean, that's a That's a double-edged sword, that one. I mean, it's a monumental task to get specimens like this to spawn in captivity, but then you're also trying to fight the challenge of trying to make that an economical process so that it's a viable option. Because as incredible as it is, if we can get Scolly to spawn in captivity, if the process means that they cost $100,000 each, to be fair, it's probably a short-lived program.
That's right.
So we're going to get them down to a price where it makes it just viable to continue, but also just means that they become the choice over the wild collected, and possibly even get to the point in the future where they can be used in reef restorations.
Yeah, that's right.
And repopulating.
A key example, I think, with our successful spawns in the last 2 years, obviously it's been a big learning curve, but some of the things we've learned, for example, a simple thing would be feeding. So a lot of these broodstock that you see come from the wild, and their best feeding times is at night when they put their feeding tentacles out.
Yes.
But we've actually found with some of our settled scollies that have been captively spawned, they have their tentacles out all through the day. So just something as simple as that, where we can feed during the day, no daylight, no nighttime feeds, actually reduces the cost and actually grow faster, because whether it's a learned behaviour, I guess, out on the reef for the scollies not to put their sensitive feeding tentacles out when there's visual feeders, fish around that might peck at them. I don't really know, but one of the key differences we've seen is our settled scollies are actually feeding all through the day. And that's really key for us. And from we've done 2 successful spawning seasons. And one of the big things we've found is changing our feeding regime, our nutritional profile, and how often we're feeding has actually produced almost double the growth in some of our scollies. So some of the scollies from our first spawning season are a lot smaller, and we can't attribute it to anything except an improvement in our feeding regime. So,
Incredible. And you touched on some of the efficiencies there. And I know we won't go into extreme detail, but some of the efficiencies just in energy usage is obviously a huge factor at the moment. And we've seen things like the greenhouse, where obviously lighting's not required. And I know the team here at Monsoon are on the verge of announcing some other incredible aquaculture developments that will further help energy usage in inland aquaculturing of corals, which is super exciting. And I guess I know anyone in the reef keeping hobby knows that lighting is one of those massive expenses. But it also comes down to almost like a death by 1,000 cuts, where sure, you can get those low-hanging fruit like lighting and things like that, but if you can get small savings at every single step along the way, it all adds up to be a massive saving. And when you're at a scale of a facility like this, that is absolutely game-changing.
Yeah, well, essentially, that's again where I come in terms of looking at a holistic approach. We're not just looking at spawning, we're looking at the end product and reducing costs related to that. So that's both for the private industry, but also potentially for reef restoration projects. And a key to that for land-based aquaculture is keeping your costs down, particularly in power usage. So using the sun is a key one, but also understanding the biology of animals and how they respond to the sun. Scollies don't necessarily come from 10 centimetres of water. So working out how much sunlight we need, how the track of the sun actually changes their growth rates. So they might get a lower amount of light, different spectral quality early in the morning and late in the day, and then a lot more intense light for a short period at the end of the day. How does that actually change the way that the animal responds to its environment, whether it's colour production, whether it's growth, recovery? And we're finding some really interesting things in that greenhouse, but also to the other end of having systems. You're holding these corals for a long time. Aquaculture of corals is different in a way that we're holding corals for months to years at a time. And so there's a lot more factors to consider in there. They're not coming in and then going out quickly. We want to make sure that we're both efficient with what we're providing, And one of those things, I think, for that greenhouse, the next step is looking at efficient ways to create that flow that corals need. And we've found often across the board that flow can be a real issue for us, both for making sure that the animal can clear any detritus or any food that we're feeding. When we're pushing the food, that means anything that they don't want to eat still potentially settles on their flesh. So you need to be able to help the animal to clear that. So efficiencies in that respect are really key to that holistic approach to reducing the costs. Yeah.
I know just from water cooler conversations with yourself, the old phrase in reef keeping of heavy in and heavy out really has applied here in that, not just in the spawning side of things, but just aquaculture in general of they need food, they need snacks. But conversely, the last thing we want is for them to waste energy pushing off excess food and getting that clear of them. So having the ability to get a lot of food into the system, but also then to clear out what they don't want.
Yeah, that's really finding that optimum. I guess we're both finding that balance. In aquaculture, you're finding the balance between simulating natural environmental conditions, but also out in the natural environment, you'll have winter conditions where the corals are stressed for a short period and they're using energy to just survive. In the summer conditions, the same thing. That's where you'll find stressed reefs go into bleaching.
Yes.
We have the ability to control that and produce optimal conditions all the time, and feeding is a part of that. So for these, I think I've already mentioned, we're looking at optimizing how we feed these animals, but that comes into a few different categories. There's prey capture, there's ingestion and digestion.
Yes.
So we want to find prey, whether it's live prey or inert prey, whether you're using prefabricated pellets that might be available in the aquarium trade, or something that we make in-house.
Yep.
How does that differ in a feeding response to having a live animal? So again, drawing from experience with fish aquaculture and raising larvae, often what you'll find is a live food, even though it may have a lower nutritional value.
Yes.
It actually stimulates a feeding response, so the larvae actually eat it. If you've got a really good optimized inert food that the fish aren't going to eat, you're not going to have a live fish for very long. And similar concepts here. What actually can we provide to these animals that will stimulate that feeding response? And then from there, what nutrition can we pass on to them that will optimize their growth, optimize their recovery, and in this case, optimize gamete production, producing eggs. What do these animals actually put in their eggs to impart to the generation coming?
Yes.
That's important, that we need to provide to them now, that they can impart and produce high quality stock. And that actually feeds on to, these guys can produce a lot of eggs, but if they're low quality eggs, your survivals will come way down.
Yes.
And again, that's where costs come in. If we can impart the optimal nutrition to them now, which is passed on to their babies, we get much better survivals down the track, much more resilient animals. And let's face it, with most biological systems, those early grow out phases where you have an animal that's developing out in the open ocean, looking for somewhere to settle and then starting to grow from there, that's their most sensitive times. We need to be able to give them the best chance for their survival, both in an aquaculture situation and also it applies to a reef restoration situation as well.
Absolutely. Now, we're standing here in front of one of your dedicated broodstock systems, but I believe you've got something else you can show us, some of the final products.
Yeah, so I've just chosen out a few select pieces in the tank behind you. We've got our babies in a few different areas. The good thing about aquaculture is we have separate systems for redundancy. I rarely want to put our babies in the one spot just in case something happens. There's so many things that can happen.
Yes.
So we've actually got them behind you there.
Wow, show us.
Let's see.
And this is a recently expanded building in the Monsoon facility?
Yeah, so we've recently taken over the rest of our facility here. So previously we were sharing it with a seafood smokery business. They've since expanded themselves, which is great, but it's also opened up the door for us to be able to expand into their facilities, which has really been great for us in winning that second grant. We have now have dedicated areas where we can build broodstock systems, early grow-out systems for those early phases of spat.
Yes.
And that's one of the key things that we needed to learn from our first round of funding, is what I call the 3 Ps: pests, parasites and predators. So
yes.
ensuring that these sensitive stages of these animals are protected from our normal operations, where while we don't get wild stock in very often directly, that normally goes to our other facilities in Cairns and Darwin, we still get key pieces from the wild in for our fragging program to make sure we have high quality corals.
Nice.
And there's always risk there with animals coming from the wild, that they're bringing in hitchhikers, pests, parasites and predators, and even things that you'd see in your aquarium normally, which don't cause any issues. Anecdotally, I've found things like your amphipods and your amphipods mainly, can actually become predatory to the early stages of spat.
For sure.
So we need to be able to protect our early stages before they are pushed out into our grow-out phases. So it's been really good to expand into this area. There's a lot of work, obviously, and you've already mentioned that I'm on the tools.
More systems coming, and
procuring things.
This is only one of many rooms where things are expanding out.
Yeah, so this is probably one of our smallest systems, and while we do have broodstock here, that's not their end game. This is actually our early grow-out area,
yes.
where once the animals are settled and they've taken up their zooxanthellae, they'll be moving out of our hatchery area. Moving into these areas for early grow-out. Protected early grow-out is what I call it. Yep.
Amazing.
So we do have some examples here of our scollies. These are actually mostly from the spawning season last year. So actually that's an older one there. I can tell that one. But you can see these two here. You can see this spawning season was last year. And just with our change in feeding regimes, we're getting heaps better growth. And that's really good for us. We were a bit worried about the rate of growth of scollies, but from a spawning season in September, October last year to now at that size, we're really approaching, potentially within a year, they're a really good size for selling.
Absolutely.
And you can see a good example there. He's got his tentacles all the way out. He's wanting to feed straight away. We don't really see that in the broodstock too often. These guys wanting food all the time. So that's why we're
good
part
problem
of
to have.
Yeah, that's it. And that's where even more experimenting is, the way I like to put it, is observing and interacting. So we're observing these behaviours. We go, well, if they're looking to feed quite often during the day, let's start putting some constant foods in, or some pulse feeding, to be able to give them the nutrition they need and push that feeding to them to be able to get that growth out of them. Amazing. And see what sort of maximum growth we can get to a marketable size. Yep.
Incredible. So what we're looking at here are all captive spawned scollies here,
yep,
that are going to be available for the aquarium trade.
Yeah, so I am being a little bit selfish. I might keep a few for our closed life cycle program, because particularly, as I said, they're showing different behaviours to the wild stock.
Yes.
So if that's the case, and we're getting good growth out of them, they're happy to feed all through the day, then we can get them to a size and then start completely closing that life cycle. So
yes,
we're starting to market some to build that excitement. It's really exciting for us to be able to be part of that change to supplement the wild capture fishery with spawned scollies. It's really exciting to us, so we're really keen to get them out and build some excitement. Yeah.
For sure. I mean, it's such an evolution in the hobby. We know that wild collected quotas are something that are always a challenge and are probably only going to get tighter and tighter, which is for good reason. So the aquaculturing side of things, in fragging them to make them available for the hobby, and the work that you guys have done here to make that process as quick and as seamless. I say seamless from the outside looking in. I'm sure there's lots and lots of work involved, but you've got it definitely down to a well-oiled machine. And now to take the next leap into captive spawning, which means we can reproduce these corals without ever seeing a blade is just something else. And to have them, I'm going to go as far, and I'm sure, I'm quite confident in saying this, that it would be a world first. This would be the first.
To our knowledge, I think it is.
Yeah.
I could be wrong myself, but I think it is the world's first commercially available captive spawned scolimia.
Unbelievable. It's quite a mouthful,
yeah.
It is super exciting. And to be fair, this is not the only species you guys do here. You're captive spawning multiple other corals I've seen.
Yeah. So some of the other key species we're looking at are acans. We're also looking at gold torch, some of those higher value corals.
Yes.
But that's just the start. So we've got to start somewhere, and particularly for reef restoration situations, you know, again, it's taking a holistic approach. If you want to restore a reef, you want as many of the different species of coral in that reef as possible.
Yeah.
So I guess that's the next steps for us, is to start small and refine those processes, and then start branching out into other species. And there's always going to be hiccups along the way, just with different species of animal. We're not a monoculture like many food fish aquaculture operations would be.
Yes.
And that's the real challenge for us, is how we can set up systems and infrastructure to be able to spawn many species, 10, 20, 30 different species in one place.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were talking about it the other day about in the fish aquaculture scene, if you said to someone, you know, well, if you can spawn, if you can breed clownfish, then you can do, I don't know, any other fish from the ocean, they would laugh at you. They know it's not
that's
that
not
simple.
Necessarily true.
You're welcome to the coral trade, and that's, I mean, we're aware of that, but it's something that we are trying to do, and there's complexities there that cannot be understated, that's for sure.
No, that's right, yeah, and particularly when you've got, in the case of the scollies, an animal that's a broadcast spawner, so they're releasing the sperm and eggs into the open ocean. It actually adds another step compared to something like your torches, which we would call a brooder. So they actually have a fertilized egg that inside the animal, and it's released as a competent planula. So within 24 to 48 hours, they're settling out. They don't need a larval culture period. And so that eliminates a step and hopefully increases their survival. Might be a good survival mechanism, but also a trade-off for that, which I can see, is these guys produce far fewer gametes. So far fewer planula come out of a single polyp compared to a scolly that would release thousands.
Sure.
So every single coral, we're going back to that, every single coral has their own different survival mechanisms, their spawning and life cycle mechanisms that we need to investigate and optimize for each step of the way. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I for one cannot thank you enough for the work you're doing. It's truly exciting to see what is honestly the future of reef keeping for the home hobbyist, and so much more beyond that, really, when we talk about just the commercial viability of things, and also potential reef restoration projects. It's truly exciting stuff, and I know you live and breathe it. I know you put many hours in here, but you should be very proud of your achievements. And likewise to Monsoon Aquatics, they've obviously backed you all the way here, and it's a team effort here. I know everyone that works here is like a family, and you guys all do incredible work. So thank you for taking the time to explain your process and share this potential world first, which is super exciting in things like YouTube. But in all reality, it is super exciting, and I'm really excited to see where these go in the coming weeks, months, years, and decades.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
All right, guys, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed that video as much as I enjoyed filming it. Jonathan is just a wealth of information, and watching the man in his natural environment was a sight to behold. And I really want to give a massive shout out to both Jonathan and the entire team at Monsoon Aquatics for allowing me both to come up and see the facility, but also to take away some of their super valuable time so I could film and get all of this information to share with you guys at home. So by all means, please do give the video a thumbs up and give all of your congratulations down to Monsoon Aquatics in the comments section down below. All right, now I did touch on earlier in the video that Monsoon Aquatics are making some of the first spawn, that batch, available to the Australian market. So if you would like to have a piece of home reefing history in your reef tank, be sure to get your local fish store to reach out to Monsoon Aquatics. They have a limited number of this first batch available to the Australian wholesale market, and it is your opportunity to have something that I personally believe is the future of reef keeping, one of the first steps in the process available to have on display in your aquarium at home, which I think is just revolutionary. So I guess there's probably no better reason than to wrap things up there. If you do have any questions, comments, feedback at all for myself or the team at Monsoon Aquatics, please do pop in the comments section down below. And one last time, I want to give a massive shout out to Monsoon Aquatics for making it possible for me to get up there and check out this facility, because it has truly reinvigorated my passion for the reef aquarium hobby, and I hope through these videos it has for you guys too. Anyway guys, I will leave you with that. Till next time, stay safe, keep reefing. Cheers, bye.